More unmarried couples may be considering buying a home together. Joining us now is Rebecca Walser, president of Walser Wealth Management. Rebecca, it's good to see you this afternoon. So
Great to be here.
How should we think with our partner about approaching these financial conversations when we're planning on buying a house? How do we go about it?
It's a great question. And we have almost 17 million people that are now co-owning spaces without being married. So it's huge. And so really, Kristen, there's three different areas we need to think about. We need to think about the finances of it and who is going to pay what bill. And usually when we have people that are unmarried that are buying a house together, they might not even have a joint checking account. So they might want to think about how are we going to pay expenses, how are we going to share expenses, all those things. That's the first thing you think about, the finances of it. The second part, of course, is how are we actually going to cover the taxes? How are we going to be titling the house? So the ownership titling is really important because there's differences between married and unmarried. And then finally, the legal, what will happen in the event of a breakup, who gets what, where does the equity go, that kind of thing. So there's a lot to discuss.
Are there any advantages or even disadvantages to buying a home with your partner if you are unmarried?
Well, it could be a little bit of a legal, it's not just an easy breakup, like here's your keys, you're out, and the apartment, we can just switch, and the apartment lease is up. It's not so easy. You actually own it, so you have a mortgage, and you personally have guaranteed that mortgage. So yes, it's tied to the house, but if you just walk away, they could obviously, try to take the house back. You could damage your credit. All of these things have to be considered. So even though there's not a legal marriage, it is a legal commitment when you take that mortgage together and you buy that piece of property together. You're titling an asset in both your names. So if there's the most common legal strategy is what we call tenants in common. And what that means is if you and I were to buy a house together, I would own 50%, you would own 50%. If something were to happen to me, if I were to die, my 50% would go based on my will. So it might go to my heirs, and you might all of a sudden have to deal with my family that maybe you can't stand. So these are the kinds of things that legally have to be worked out as far as how we're going to have title to the property. In the event of a breakup, we need to figure out who's going to pay what, who gets to keep the house. All of these things have to really be clearly spelled out. And that doesn't happen so much when you're married because these are the conversations you usually have before you actually get married.
Rebecca, all really good advice. So what are the titling options for unmarried couples that do want to buy a home together?
You really have two options. You can do what we call TIC, which is the tenants in common, where we each have a percentage of ownership that we get to keep into our death, and it goes to our heirs. You could name the other person as the heir, of course, but if you don't do that, you have to be careful as to how that would happen. Is something that happens to the two people that are owning it. The other way is what we call joint with rights or survivorship. That's what most married couples have. And what that means is in the event of either person passing away prematurely, the other person automatically inherits their portion. It's rights of survivorship means it's my house if something happens to you, or your house if something happens to me. So that's mostly the way married couples have it. There's one that's called tenants by the entirety. That's reserved only for married couples. So you'd have to actually be married to get that one. So it's either joint with rights of survivorship or it's tenants in common. Those are the two choices.
What are the rights and responsibilities, Rebecca, that co-owners of a property have?
So you obviously have to pay property taxes. If you have a mortgage, the mortgage company is going to require you to have the property insured because they don't want to have a mortgage on the property and there's a fire and there's no insurance and now they're out of their mortgage and you physically don't have, several $100,000 to pay them. So you must carry insurance. You must have, obviously pay property taxes. You probably have some kind of ordinance at the city level or even the homeowner association level that require you to keep maintenance of your house, paint it so often, pressure wash it, clean it. So you have those restrictions they can take you into court for those, believe it or not, Kristen. So those can be quite ugly if you're not maintaining the property. Again, the financial discussions around having a property that you're not married with somebody is important because like if you have your own bank accounts, where are the mortgage payments going to come from? Who's going to pay the insurance? Who's going to pay the taxes? Who's going to claim those expenses on the filing? Since we're not married and we're not filing jointly, we're filing separately. Is one person going to claim all the expenses and the other person just gets the standard deduction? These are all the ramifications of owning an asset jointly that does require expenses annually that do get filed on taxes that have to be considered.
All right, Rebecca Walser, breaking down everything that we need to know. Rebecca's the president of Walser Wealth Management. Rebecca, thank you again. And go